From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Anti-Israel protesters at Columbia University escalate by taking over an academic building, leading to an effective shutdown of the New York campus. Plus, the judge in Donald Trump's hush money case finds him in contempt for violating a gag order, fining him $9,000 and warning that jail time could be next. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnists Kim Strassel and Bill McGurn. Columbia President Minouche Shafik had given the Gaza encampment on campus a deadline of 2 p.m. Monday to disperse, which the protesters duly ignored. Then in the middle of the night or early Tuesday morning, they broke into Hamilton Hall and barricaded themselves inside while unfurling a banner saying Intifada from the facade. The administration's response was to effectively shut down the campus, limiting access to students that live in the residential buildings and employees who provide so-called essential services to campus building labs and residential student life. Kim, I will read a statement here. This is a piece of the press release put out online by a group called CU Apartheid Divest. It says, "We cannot sit by as our tuition and labor support mass murder. For the last 2 weeks, students have put their safety, homes, education, and careers in jeopardy, knowing no universities remain in Gaza due to U.S.-funded bombs. As members of the Imperial Core, the least we can do is pressure this university to divest, open the gates, end the occupation, and welcome the free movement of all people, from Palestinians to our neighbors in Harlem, from the river to the sea," unquote. Kim, that strikes me as a highly inflated sense of what these students think they're doing and the amount that the outside world cares that they took over this building on Columbia's campus.
I also think it is a deliberate ignoring of all of the havoc and problems that they are causing to other students. One of the things that Columbia has now done, it's closed its campus to all but students who live in 7 dorms that exist on campus and employees who are providing essential services. So there are people who are not going to work. There are students, I saw one graduate student noting that he couldn't get on campus and that he's a low-income student, that he depends on the meals that are provided by the university to him to get along every day. They're not being allowed onto campus. Obviously, regular classes, we've talked about this, have been at times online. There's essentially a bit of a lockdown. And so they're accomplishing nothing but causing an enormous problem for campus security. Obviously, the hostility that's radiating toward Jewish students who feel insecure on the campus. And this is now, of course, spreading everywhere. We are seeing new encampments, Virginia Commonwealth University, Virginia Tech, Princeton, University of Texas, Austin, University of North Carolina, San Francisco State. And some of these are also escalating into even bigger deals out in California State Polytechnic in Humboldt. Students have also taken over a hall there. They barricaded themselves in Siemens Hall. They've renamed it Intifada Hall. And Portland State University, students have taken over a library. And the bigger worry here, too, is that at some point, as campus security, but also regular police are being sent in to begin to break up some of these, that this escalates to a point where somebody ends up getting hurt.
Kim mentioned the disruption on campus. Let's listen to the perspective from just a regular Columbia University student, Jessica Schwalb, interviewed this morning on Fox News.
Part of me really wants to see NYPD force these students to face consequences for their very belligerent, very violent actions. And another part of me understands that this movement will only become more inflamed if they do face more arrests, and it would almost like make this problem worse. So I'm thinking maybe more academic punishments, like failure, automatic failure of classes, or just some other more painful, like long-term disciplinary action that can affect their, job prospects upon graduation.
Bill, what do you make of that? I guess my thought is, why not just blockade the building that they're inside and wait for these students that are occupying it to come out? I mean, maybe there are some vending machines inside, but when they run out of Snickers bars, they're going to have to go somewhere.
I think the takeover of the building, as far as I know, there's no weapons and so forth, so there's no danger there. They can wait them out, but they let it get this far by clearing out the quad and then doing nothing when they came back the next day. They imposed deadlines, I think at least 2 deadlines that were ignored, including the last one. So more broadly, what we're seeing is the inability of liberal leadership at liberal institutions to enforce the minimum rules of a liberal community, like respect for others and free speech. And that's not just Columbia, that's at all these other places. I think the added problem is they can handle this one building if that's where it stays at. As you say, no food, they're going to get hungry and so forth. But I think the reason they have these things, there's no consequences so far. Columbia announced that the students would be suspended. I think they should be suspended for a long period of time, like 2 or 3 years, or expelled. Let them appeal it. Let them have the process. But there should be real consequences, something to make them think twice about doing it. And the universities don't have real consequences. You know, they appeal the suspensions or amnesty as part of a deal that brings it all to an end. And neither does the law. When they block people going out to JFK, they're released with a small fine. We have to have consequences for actions. And these actions are not inadvertent disruptions of the community, but deliberate attacks on the community. They know that's how they get attention. And they don't negotiate. Look at the Columbia leadership and the students. The students are following the strategy of Moss. They're not giving in on anything. And why should they? They've been getting kind of what they want all along without it.
To that point, maybe negotiating was the first mistake here by Columbia. Just to draw an analogy, if you come home and there's somebody who set up an encampment in your living room, you don't start a negotiation about the terms under which they will leave. You call the police and you have them ejected. And the moves by the Columbia University administration that they seem to think were conciliatory, okay, we'll go back and look at our investment policies and so forth. The protesters seem to have only been emboldened by those. And Kim, I wonder if there are some other examples of universities that are taking a different approach. I would point to a fascinating statement that was issued on Monday by the University of Florida. There were some arrests there. Here's the statement. This is not complicated. The University of Florida is not a daycare, and we do not treat protesters like children. They knew the rules, they broke the rules, and they'll face the consequences. For many days, we have patiently told protesters, many of whom were outside agitators, that they were able to exercise their right to free speech and free assembly. We also told them that clearly prohibited activities would result in a trespassing order from UPD. Then they went ahead and they issued those orders and they made those arrests, Kim.
Yes, this is the way you should handle the situation. And somebody had also put up, it was useful, just in case anybody wasn't clear, they had a copy of the University of Florida paper from the Division of Student Life that very clearly delineates allowable activities, which include speech, expressing viewpoints, and holding signs in hands, followed by a list of prohibitive items and activities, which included no amplified sound, no demonstrations inside buildings, no littering, no camping, no sleeping, no unmanned signs, no blocking of areas, no threats, no violence, and no weapons. And it goes along. And this is exactly right. I love the phrase, we are not a daycare, okay? And we do not treat protesters like children. You are in our environment. We have laid out the rules. We have told you what they are. We have now warned you numerous times that you are in violation, and now you face the consequences. And one thing that I would note, by the way, is that if you have been found trespassing, one of the consequences is students will receive a 3-year trespass and suspension, which would bar them from all university properties for 3 years. Okay, that's a pretty big deal. I'm imagining that there's going to be some parents that are looking at their tuition bills and wondering what exactly all that money was for so that their students could pop off on campus. And this is the kind of consequences that should be leveled. I think if more universities had done this from the very beginning, that we wouldn't be seeing this spreading and escalating. And it's good to see a number of universities following in the steps of the University of Florida. They are moving to arrests. One thing that I would just note too, there does seem to be a little bit of a distinction between some of the public universities and how they are handling this, which is with a lot firmer hand, and some of the more coddled build private universities, which in general seem to be the ones that are allowing their students to continue with all this.
Hang tight. We'll be right back in a minute. Welcome back. To the point about consequences, the protesters at Columbia are saying that they have three demands: divestment, financial transparency, and amnesty. And amnesty is the one that gives me a kick, Bill. And remember, we are right in front of what is supposed to be finals time. There are supposed to be exams that are going on. And if the campus is closed, I don't know how that affects the exams of students who are not part of the protest. But I imagine the students who are part of the protest are not sitting in the hall that they've taken over now, reading their trigonometry and their organic chemistry books. The other question that comes to my mind here is, where are the trustees of Columbia University? Because maybe this was not a crisis for the institution when there was just this encampment going on. But right now, it does seem like it has reached that level. What happens now is going to affect Columbia University's reputation. If there are high school seniors who are considering Columbia University and they're considering another institution, I can imagine that some of them, or maybe with the guidance of their parents, would think that maybe another institution would be a place where those future college students would have better luck focusing on their academics and their careers that they want to have instead of this kind of protest culture. But Bill, we don't really see anything from those trustees, at least not yet.
No, I don't think we can really expect some. Most university trustees, in my limited experience dealing with some, and my wife is a trustee for one school, most trustees, I think, they want to be treated like a poobah when they're on campus, get good parking, good tickets for the football game, and other benefits. They don't want to make tough decisions. I was once an advisor for conservative student organizations. And one piece of advice I had is have the phone numbers of every trustee. And when there's an issue, call them up and get their point of view. That's the last thing they want, is be on the record on something controversial. So, and I think the presidents are drawn from that pool. They're not much different. Kim made an excellent point. The distinction between the elite universities, private universities, and the state schools. This is a staggering change because the elite colleges used to present themselves, we're a model for civilized life in a modern democracy. We can settle things by reason and so forth. And today, they're the most unreasonable places on earth. I think one reason the public universities have been bigger is because in those states, governors have more of a say over public universities than they do over private universities. And when a school president knows is going to be backed up by the governor and other people, it might make them more firm. Kim mentioned also the statement, about we're not going to treat protesters like children. There was another statement by the University of Chicago, which has a history of enforcing good rules for free speech. And they put out a statement and they noted at Chicago, I think last quarter, they gave permission for students to unveil a huge Palestinian flag on one of the quads and get signatures and get people to their cause. But there was another attempt, there was another protest, and they took over a university building, and that was not permitted. And they cracked down on that. But it all goes back to consequences. I like him mentioning the 3-year suspension. The university presidents love to put out statements. And we don't need so much or more statements, but some show that they're willing to make the statements stick. They're willing to enforce basic rules. Look, you can't have cars without stoplights, stop signs, and enforcement. Now, enforcement isn't an issue every day for every driver, but you need those rules to enable traffic to flow and people to get where they are. You need them at universities too. And so far, we've seen very few good attempts to nip the problem in a bud, and so it grows.
One final thought on this, another fascinating piece of news on Monday, 21 House Democrats led by Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey and Dan Goldman of New York sent a letter to the trustees at Columbia University. This is part of what they said. It is past time for the university to act decisively, disband the encampment, and ensure the safety and security of all its students. They went on to say if any trustees are unwilling to do this, they should resign so that they can be replaced by individuals who will uphold the university's legal obligations. And they're referring to legal obligations under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act to provide a safe environment for Jewish students. And Kim, I think that's interesting because President Biden has issued some statements on this. The White House condemned the takeover of Hamilton Hall. But there are some Democrats, some members of his party, who seem to think that this political problem is bigger than the White House is acknowledging.
The split among Democrats is quite noticeable, and it's growing too. It's also spilling out into the open, the back and forth, because what you've had are some Democrats now who are openly attempting to be on the side of the law and also the safety of Jewish students. It ought to be an obvious point. The thing that was surprising to me was that so few people actually signed that letter. This should be something that isn't a tough call. I appreciate that it was more congressmen from New York, but we've generally seen the Democratic Party trying to have it both ways. The president in particular issuing statements saying, that he condemns all sides, when in fact there's really one side that's in the wrong here. I noticed a spat that broke out about a week ago. Jared Moskowitz, who was a Democratic congressman from Florida, called out Senator Bernie Sanders for being too quiet on the issue of anti-Semitism. This provoked an impassioned response from Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who has actually been to Columbia to express solidarity with the protesters. And she called his comment about Bernie Sanders shameful, and Moskowitz came back and went back at her. So there's definitely a real tension that continues to grow in the party. And this cannot be great for the White House, because you are seeing not just that divide in the Democratic Party, but you're seeing this general sense of chaos play out across university campuses under this White House. And while, it isn't necessarily the president's job to be dealing with this, we ought to keep the attention on the trustees and the administrators. Right now, with this escalating, not going away, I think it's a growing political liability for the Democratic Party.